On that bright September afternoon, something in the air took me across the bridge over the River Lee and into a part of town I'd never been before. I'd spent nearly the entire afternoon scouring the sidewalks of the city center in pursuit of a fiddle. It didn't have to be fancy and certainly not expensive, just something that I could play. Although this path over the bridge was a bit out of the way, I thought that maybe I'd find some luck if I gave the unknown a chance. I walked all along the strip of stores on that new side of the river and found nothing. Up and down the streets and alleys, past the many pubs where old, drunken men stood and smoked cigarettes as they stared down the road in anticipation of the next pint. Past the strange, subpar pizza places on the corners, past the millions of chippers, past the churches and cathedrals. I looked into all the windows as I walked by. They were all filled with stuff, but empty of what I was looking for. Eventually I found myself in the industrial part of town, where the men were hard at work, drilling into the ground and making a bunch of noise. I turned the corner and realized I had gone in a full circle. The bridge I had crossed earlier was just up ahead. There was nowhere else to go but onward until I reached the bridge that would take me home again. So I headed off, fiddleless, sighing, frustrated, and blind from the sun's radiance that reflected off the quiet ripples of the afternoon Lee. Screw the fiddle. I don't even want to play the fiddle anyway, I grouchily lumbered on down the sidewalk, feeling sorry for myself. I would have kept on walking across the bridge and sauntered back home if I hadn't heard his wavering voice softly cry out, "Hey, man." He was a short guy, not terribly old, but not young either. I remember he was wearing these cheesy palm tree Hawaiian-style shorts. "I need to catch the next bus to Limerick, but I'm short €2," he said as he looked up at me with his sincere and glassy eyes. "I swear I'm not just asking you for money." He was trying hard not to slur his words. I rummaged in my pocket and handed him a €2 coin, because you never really know if people tell you the truth or not. I was about to go on my way back home when the idea stopped me. "Maybe you could do me a favor." I took a chance. "I'm looking for a place where I could find a fiddle. Not an inexpensive one or a new one, just something that I can play." He frowned and grumbled and looked out into the river. "Something you can play, He asked me what time it was, and I said it was 5:40. His eyes twinkled with the sun's reflection, and he nodded. "Come on." So off we went, up the street where I walked back and forth 1,000 times earlier, past the drunk pub men and pizza shops, past the chippers and churches and cathedrals. I didn't even glance into each passing window to see if the fiddle would be there. He and I chatted along the way, about America and Ireland and everything in between. I was so thankful I told him I didn't want him to miss his bus, but for some reason he shrugged it off and said that it didn't matter. He said that he would still be walking around. I was a bit confused. He said, "Would you tell I'm an alcoholic?" And I told him I couldn't tell him the slightest, not wanting to make him feel bad. But I knew, and he knew that I knew, but none of that mattered. We were lifelong strangers for that moment as we crossed the streets and climbed the hills of Cork. We were best buds. Eventually we got to the shop, which was a shop that sold pretty much everything for cheap. He went right in ahead of me and straight to the counter and said to the clerk, "My friend here is looking for a violin. Could you help him out?" He had to get going, but before he left I shook his hand and thanked him. I asked him his name. "Tommy," he smiled. And then he was gone, down the street and back into the unknown again from which he came. I didn't end up getting my fiddle there. I eventually found a real music shop that sold them cheap in my size. But I still found something on that bright September afternoon. Something valuable, expensive, that isn't found when looking into the windows of the passing shops. I never saw Tommy again, but I don't think I ever will. Which is a shame, because I owe him a lot more than €2.